welcome to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce's Infrastructure Projects in Brazil, Opportunities and Challenges for Investors webinar. Thank you all for attending. We would like us to especially thank DLA Piper and Campos Melo Advogado for sponsoring this event. I am John Welch, the Executive Director of the Brazilian American Chamber, and on behalf of the Chamber, we wish you all health and happiness in this difficult time. The Investment Partnership Program, the PPI, has launched a new stage of infrastructure projects and ramping up the granting of long-term concessions to private companies to operate airports, ports, highways, railways, oil and gas and production, and power generation and distribution. The program also entails privatizing state-owned corporations and the sale of other public sector assets. Brazilian states have also established projects to attract investment and grant concessions in addition to extensive use of public-private partnerships in the operation of hospitals, prisons, and data centers. The Brazilian National Development Bank, Development and Social Development Bank, BNDES, in addition to underwriting investment projects, is now acting as an advisor to federal, state, and local governments in structuring these initiatives. Today, we bring together a noteworthy panel to discuss the prospects for Brazilian infrastructure investment, including planned projects for 2021 and 22, defining the most relevant projects for U.S. companies and investors, the total amount that Brazil intends to invest in 21 and 22, and we will discuss the challenges that foreign companies and investors face in participating in these projects. Our moderator today is Rafael Jordão Bussier, partner at Campos Melo Advogado, specializing in real estate advising, domestic and international companies with special emphasis on the development of large-scale real estate projects, hospitality and leisure, built-to-suit, construction and infrastructure. He also served as special advisor to the Federal Estate Oversight and Governance Department of Brazil's Ministry of the Economy. He's a member of the Real Estate Law Committee of the OAB, the Brazilian Order of Lawyers, Ibradim, Brazilian Real Estate Law Institute, and Associação Brasileira de Advogados do Mercado Imobiliário, the Brazilian Real Estate Lawyers Association. Before we begin, I would ask you to please use the Q&A tab for questions. You can make them at any time, and we will look to answer them after the panel discussion during the Q&A period. Thank you. Rafael?
Hello, John. Many thanks for your introduction. And in the name of Campos Melo, in cooperation with DLA Piper, I'd like to thank you and all the members of the board of the Brazilian American Chambers of Commerce for this opportunity. It is an honor to be here sharing this panel with Gustavo Montezano, the president of the Brazilian Development Bank, the main financing agent for development in Brazil. We are also sharing this panel with a special speaker, Marta Salier, the Secretary of the Investment Partnership Program of the Brazilian federal government, known in Brazil as the PPI. The main purpose of the program is to ensure the expansion with quality of the public infrastructure, promote fair competition in the execution of partnerships, and last but not least, ensure legal stability and security of contracts, with the guarantee of minimum intervention of the states in the business or in the investment itself. Finally, sharing the moderation of this panel with me, we have my partner, Carolina Caiado, head of the team of Public Law and Governmental Affairs at Campos Melo Advogados. And now I kindly ask Montezano, Marta, and Carol to take in this moment of the opening remarks to say a few words before we present our first question to them. Montezano, can you be the first one, please?
Sure, Rafael. Rafael, Carolina, thank you very much for the invitation. John and all the American Chamber team, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you again. And I wish you have all a fruitful discussion here about projects infrastructure, because one thing we have been said and we reinforce the outcome of this COVID crisis and the long-term structuring and investments and Brazilian growth will be based on infrastructure. That's why it's a pleasure for me to be here. And again, I wish you have a very fruitful, informative debate here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Gustavo. Marta, please. Oh, you are in the mute mode. Unmute on the left side. below in your screen.
Okay, now I found it. I'm
got
so
it.
sorry. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for this invitation. Happy to be here with Montezano as well. 2021 is the year of the auctions here in Brazil for infrastructure and also for privatizations. We have worked a lot in 2019 and 2020 to structure all those opportunities, even though 2020 was such a difficult year for all of us. But it didn't stop us from moving forward with feasibility studies analysis on a very important portfolio of projects. So that's why 2021 has so much to offer. We were in B3 last week in São Paulo with Minister Tarcísio, with many important transportation projects for auction, 22 airports, 5 different port terminals, and also very important railway. So we called it the Infrastructure Week, the Infra Week. And we went to São Paulo with some critics on should we be moving forward with auctions in this moment, knowing all the effects and impacts of COVID-19 on demand for some infrastructures. Airports, as an example, have suffered a lot with this health crisis. But we left the auction very happy of the number of players we saw. We had more than 7 players for the airports as an example, the consortiums. And coming from different countries, we had 4 different countries, and with very important bids that represent that Brazil has a lot to offer and that investors are believing in the growth of our country. So thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Carolina.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to host you here together with Rafael and John at the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. So with no further additions, I think we may start with the questions. It's an honor and a pleasure to receive you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Montezano, the first question is going to be to you, Montezano. 2020 was a challenging year, especially due to the COVID-19. But even so, the year of the biggest investments from the BNDES into the domestic market. After a turbulent year, how's the bank positioned for 2021 and 2022?
Not only for 2021 or 2022.
More than that.
Yeah, looking forward, I like to summarize BNDES' mission on the infrastructure industry as we are responsible for opening the industry. And that's totally aligned with PPI guidance, with infrastructure minister guidance, with Minister of Economy. We want and we will and we are working on reducing the barrier of entry for new players in Brazil, making the level playing field more fair for either new entrants, could be smaller players that are growing in Brazil, financial players, or international players that are willing to come to Brazil. And how do you do that? How do we make our contribution on reducing those barriers? Firstly, and that's something we've been doing for the last 2 years in a very intensive mode at BNDES, was improving the quality of projects in Brazil. That's why we set up and put in place what we call the BNDES project factories. It's like an investment banking service that works both for the federal level and for states in Brazil. Having a good quality of projects, as Marta just mentioned last week, example in B3, it's crucial for new entrants. Otherwise, those that are the incumbent players in the market will have better information, will have better assessment of assets, and then they are able to make more competitive bids. So we put up in place this department in BNDES, and today we're handling roughly 120 projects with embedded investments of roughly 240 billion reais. So it's a massive value creation, and we do intend that it keeps up and running for 2021, 2023 going forward. Looking forward, we still see massive opportunities for decades of bringing projects to the market. Our main challenge, and that's a cultural change, is to set up in all players in Brazil, especially on the government side, the relevance and importance of having good projects, that they need money, it's investments, they need time, they need resource. But this is an investment where the internal rate of return is multiple times the money invested in the projects. So the first pillar of our strategy is having this business and modeling and bring quality projects to the market. First chapter. Going to the financing side, we still have the same philosophy: opening for market, opening for competition. For many years, BNDES has been fighting for market share against public banks, against private lenders, and we are reversing 180 degrees in this strategy. We do want to syndicate, we do want to co-finance and to collaborate with additional lenders in Brazil. It can be domestic, banks, capital markets, international players, multilateral banks. We do want to share our knowledge and our resource in order to have a good syndication of lenders in Brazil. The main goal there is that we can reach the project finance strict sensus structure in Brazil. For many reasons, historically, BNDES in Brazil didn't step in the risk project industry. We still work with based on standby letter of credits, based on corporate guarantees, and that's a bottleneck to increasing and growing the size of the financing market for projects in Brazil. So moving one step ahead and executing the truly project finance, where we don't need the non-recourse project finance, is a critical improvement we should be looking forward in the Brazilian market. And we are not being innovative here. We can see that in Chile, we can see that in Colombia, in Peru, in Mexico, in US. So it's something that globally it's well known. And when you do that, and for you to reach that level, it's important that you have a good syndicate of lenders co-financing the projects. That's why, in parallel, to reach the non-recourse project finance, creating the syndicated market in Brazil for project finance is a necessary step. So by doing that, we increase the amount of money, the amount of capital willing to take financial risks in Brazil for projects. But more important than that, you bring quality, you bring good names, you bring new perspectives. So if you have a consortium, a syndicate where you have a Brazilian public bank, a Brazilian private bank, an international multilateral bank, an international commercial bank, a private fund lending together, the final quality and the final governance over the project is much better than if you have just a single lender. And more than that, together we are willing and we can assume and take more risks, more project risks than if you are a single lender. So summarizing, Rafael, our goal is to opening and reducing the barrier for competitions in the infrastructure market in Brazil. 3 steps, and they are kind of connected: good projects, good quality, good modeling. Second, doing the true non-recourse project financing. In order to do that, we need to create and develop the syndication market in Brazil. And again, none of that is a big innovation in a global perspective. It's just developing here in Brazil what you see as good examples and good success of industries elsewhere.
Great, thank you, Montezano. And Marta, as you mentioned, last week we had the Infra Week in Brazil, and we can say that it was a success. The Brazilian federal government auctioned 22 airports, as you mentioned, 5 seaports, and 1 railroad. What the PPI is foreseen from a strategic point of view to expand upon the infrastructure projects in the coming 2 years or more ahead? What do you expect to be the defining trends for investments in the years ahead?
Thank you. So yes, last week was a teaser of what's coming next. So it was a very important week since we had airports together with railroad, together with ports, so showing that we're taking care of transportation, looking to all the possibilities. Then we had roads lacking, but that doesn't mean we don't have a very important portfolio of road projects, highways. We'll be back in São Paulo for an auction the 29th this month for BR 153. 080. It's a huge project that will link the state of Goiás to the state of Tocantins. Then we'll come back for another auction that already has a date in July, the BR 163. That's linking the states of Mato Grosso and Pará. It's a project very close to where we intend to have the Ferrogrão, the Greenfield Railroad. We've been talking a lot in Brazil recently. It's a smaller project, a 10-year project for the highway, because we're structuring the railroad and we need to understand the impacts of the railroad in the future in this highway. And we keep on going with more than $28.5 billion investments in highways in our portfolio, with projects being structured right now. So that's more than 18,000 kilometers of roads in Brazil, where we have feasibility studies going on, or public consultations, and even bidding documents already published for some of those. So that's a huge portfolio. And we keep on going with an important portfolio of projects in transportation. We just had the 22 airports, but we have 16 more to come next year. An auction also in 3 different blocks, and there we'll have important airports such as Congonhas in São Paulo, Santos Dumont in Rio de Janeiro, which we know are very valuable assets and will attract investors from all over the world. So we're motivated with that. And besides those 16, we have São Gonçalo do Amarante in Rio Grande do Norte, and also Campinas, very important cargo airport. Those 2 came back for rebidding. So the actual private partners that operate those assets are moving away from those projects, and we'll have new auctions for them, considering new characteristics of investments and quality obligations. So for ports as well, I think we have to highlight the transformation that is happening in Brazil, because besides moving fast with many port terminal options for auction in Brazil, we are structuring the first port privatization. That's something new for us. And in this portfolio, we have ports very important, such as the Port of Santos. So it's not exactly a privatization in the sense we are selling the land and the port. We are selling the company that administrates the port, and we'll have a sort of PPP for the administration of the port for the next 30, 35 years. So with obligations of investment, rules for quality of services, how to deal with the infrastructure also that gets to the port, so the highways, the railways, and all the investments that need to be done to get all this integrated, the logistics. But the portfolio is huge. We also have very important portfolio with oil and gas and energy generation and transmission. We have smaller projects, but still very important to show that we're diversifying the portfolio with PPPs on national parks to attract investors for developing tourism with sustainability, national forests, fishery terminals. Even this year, we already have an auction of a fishery terminal in Brazil. The mining agenda is moving very fast as well. And each time more, we try to help the states and municipalities in Brazil, as Montezano said, with all the knowledge the federal government has, and also our federal banks, to help them structure PPPs and privatizations in different sectors. And one sector that needs to be highlighted right now in Brazil is sanitation, because we're having a big transformation in that sector that also that needed a lot historically of public investments. And recently we had a change in law that opened the doors for private investments. And since then we've been helping the states and municipalities with very important projects. And this month, the 30 April, will be in São Paulo together with Montezano, together with the governor of Rio, to have the auction of SEDAI, the company of sanitation of Rio de Janeiro, a very important project.
Thank you, Marta. I think Carolina.
Yes. So, Marta, my second question would be on the most relevant project, but as you have already explained very clearly, I would add a question on how you see PPPs in the federal project, because we know that the federal government has been trying to put together PPPs for infrastructure projects, but many of them, the studies revealed that they were not eligible for PPPs because they could be feasible on common concessions. So you mentioned that the privatization of the Santos port would involve a PPP. Could you please further explain how do you see the feasibility and suitability of PPPs in infrastructure projects from the federal government?
Sure. I was using the term PPP as something more, let's say, that takes the whole possibilities
Okay,
as a
don't
public-private partnership. Yes, indeed, in Santos, it's such a big project that we know we won't need to add public money to the project. So in Brazil, we have this distinction, right, between what we call a PPP that doesn't need money from the government, so it's a concession. And a PPP, usually when we use the term here in Brazil, we mean that besides tariffs, we need to have money coming from the government to the project to make it feasible. So for the federal government, we don't have many PPPs in the sense that we need to add budget from the government to make the project viable. Most part of our projects are viable considering tariffs of the services that are provided in those infrastructures, and also additional revenues. When we consider airports, for example, you have so many additional revenues from parking, from hotels, from restaurants, and all that. So we design all the project considering the possibilities of revenues to understand how viable it is in the long term and how we can add all the capex needed to face the growth of demand during many years. So it's always hard to make this feasibility studies of project of infrastructure for more than 30 years. In a country in Brazil that grows so much, the demand for infrastructure that has such a potential of growth when we consider, for example, the airports and even the ports, where during the crisis, the coronavirus crisis, we had huge growth in Brazilian ports. So it is always an analysis that we need to look back in time and understand if we have forecasted things right. So what we try to do to diminish the risks of having a wrong forecast in 30 years is to work with triggers of investments. The triggers are excellent because we focus on the quality of service. So if demand rises more than we had forecasted, then you have this trigger of investment and the concessionaire has to start a new cycle of investments. So we try to make all those contracts very flexible so that we focus on the service and not so much in being predictable on all the investments that will need to be done in such a long period of decades.
Oh, thank you. And Montezano, do you want to add some comments on how BNDES see PPPs for infrastructure projects in Brazil, not only in the federal level, but also in state and local levels?
Yeah, sure, Carolina. Naturally, we always prefer to privatization, so it's the first option, of course. Second, the concessions, and PPP will be the third option. And as we see today, and especially after the crisis we're living now, if you see the fiscal status of both federal level and states, we are all tight. So in order to structure PPP, the critical cornerstone there is how do you guarantee, how do you collateralize the payment from the public side? And having said that, that's why we didn't see yet a big increase in PPP landscape in Brazil in the last years, and I'll be surprised if in the upcoming years we see a big ramp in the amount, in the quantity of PPPs across Brazil. As Marta mentioned, we have such a big pipeline, enormous pipeline. Likely, I'm not so sure, I cannot affirm, but likely it's the largest pipeline of for private infrastructure globally, based on privatizations and concessions. At this point in time, I don't see they're not using the PPP as any kind of bottleneck for growing, for increasing our portfolio size. Again, we have still a lot, a big quantity and volume of deals to bring to the market in 2021, 2, 3, 4. We are well served, I would say.
Oh, thank you very much. Your comments are very precious here, because for the audience, which is not from Brazil, I want to explain that our PPPs in Brazil, they are different from US and Europe. So here in Brazil, PPPs implies debt from the government. That's why Montezano and Marta are stressing that we have a large portfolio and do not need to depend on PPPs. So
Perfectly noted, Carolina. Thanks for that. I just missed this.
Yes, we need to explain, because
Perfect.
I'm tired of explaining every foreign investor come, oh, how do you see PPPs? Well, you know, but our PPPs is a Brazilian PPP. They are different. But we do see the administrative concessions improving, but not as a PPP, the original PPPs, okay, but as a long-term service agreement to the government. Okay, Rafa, do you want to address the next question?
Yeah, Montezano, you said that the BNDES now has a role of, how can I say, exclude the barrier for the foreign investments and etc., and structure good projects and etc. Can you develop more with regards how BNDES can help foreign investors to come to Brazil instructing this project, and how do you see this role in the near future of the bank?
Yes, very good question, Rafael, and then thanks for that. The answer, yes, we can develop more, we can deliver more. As I mentioned, we put in place this investment bank for the Brazilian state, for the Brazilian government, barely 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And our bottleneck now to grow this pipeline, to grow the portfolio, is handforce. We're fully busy, we're fully occupied. We have as a client, Martin, the PPI, Ministro Tarcísio, Infraestrutura, Ministro Guedes, and all the governors in Brazil. And the more we dig, the more we originate deals across Brazil, the more we see the size and the potential market for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And how can we help new investors, either domestic or international? Information, quality of products. That's why seeing BNDES not only as a financing machine, but also some place, some institution where you can create solutions, where you can find information, where you can articulate debates and ideas across the Brazilian infrastructure market is critical. The bank has a unique knowledge about Brazil, has a unique intellectual property about projects, about sectors, and I do see, and we're working for that the society as a whole can use more this intangible asset. For many years, we have been focusing in money, credit. It's important, of course, but the intangible assets that you have here at the bank, they are still underpriced. That's why, for example, we're putting in place a digital place where you can see our full portfolio of products. It's a hub de projetos, BNDES hub de projetos.bnds.gov.br. There you'll be able to find all the projects we are modeling, what are the states, a brief view about the sector, and trying to create this environment where we can share more information and bring ideas and finance technology to Brazil. That's a critical step for our development. And just reinforcing what Marta said, Brazil has been moving towards a complete renovation of its philosophy on infrastructure. Our philosophy today is based on 3 pillars. First is the fiscal discipline, keep the interest rates at I would say single digital levels. Second is good regulation. For example, what we did in sanitation, electricity, gas, cabotage, ports. We're seeing a complete revolution in the regulations in Brazil across industry. And the third pillar is, again, good projects, good modeling. PPI was founded in 2016, right, Marta, or 17? PPI was founded in 16. And what we were able to build there is a unique asset. Few countries in the world has a governance entity at the federal level with such process, discipline, evaluation, technicians with quality. Few countries in Brazil has a PPI-like governance of origination and establishing the roles of the projects in Brazil. And we, as the federal bank, we come on a second step where we work for our client PPI and the states on the, let's say, putting the hands on the work itself. But with the combination of a good structure in PPI, that again is not a government project, is a state project that will stay here forever, and a development bank that works for taking risks and preparing projects, we do think we can deliver more. And that's why, Rafael, I'm so optimistic when I look forward. In Brazil, once we stabilize the crisis, we start a long-term infrastructure cycle. It's not something that to stay for this government, but to stay for decades here, for sure.
Great, thank you. So we can expect that the bank and BNDES will maintain that pace, especially in relation to organize and with incentives for private sector investments in the infrastructure projects. Can we expect that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as I said, PPI is working there for 5 years. And now I would say that's in a maturity level. And I also congratulate Marta and all her team for what they've been done. That's something unique on a global perspective. BNDES is running on this mode for 1.5 to 2 years. In 1 to 3 years, that will also be matured. So having these machines of producing projects and bringing clients, bringing investors to play the infrastructure market is an intangible asset. It's not something that we can see, but it's like an investment bank. When you have this track up and running, it creates a lot of value. And that's a mindset that's here forever, because fiscal situation in Brazil and in emerging markets globally is there to stay. So we won't have a lot of, let's say, public money to overcome or open, release the necessity and the willingness to partnership with private investors.
Great. Carol?
So Marta, my next question is to Marta. Montezano has already said that to foster investment, not only for foreign investors, but also for smaller investors and investors intending to put money and to operate in Brazil, BNDES is focused on bringing good projects, to open finance, to co-finance and to syndicate, and to have real project finance. Would you add any comments, any ideas on how PPI is intending to foster foreign investment? We know that the USA is not on our top list of foreign investors in infrastructure. We see more Asians and European players. How, this is the $1 million question, what we could offer as a teaser to attract foreign investors, especially Americans?
Yes, I think it's good to know that we have many teasers to offer. One important teaser is how huge Brazil is, and consequently how huge the market is. So we are growing, and we have great potential for growth in different types of infrastructure projects. And the portfolio we have to offer is very significant comparing to what we have in other countries. So usually when you try to convince a group to come to Brazil, they don't want to come just for one asset. Oh, you have an auction at the end of the month, that's a highway, but what's next? Because if I come with my consultants and my specialized team to study Brazil and study the market and make an offer, and I don't win, then I just spent money and working on understanding this market, and then I don't have a second opportunity to invest. So Brazil has such a great portfolio of projects that keeps on going. So you know what the last auctions were, you know what the next auctions you will be, and you can get prepared to enter this market, understanding how big it is and understanding your priorities. So that's one important thing. Another thing is that PPI and the federal government, BNDES, we've been dialoguing a lot with investors that are already here. So we try to make the whole environment better all the time. All the contracts, we need them to get better on time. So each auction, we try to learn from what has happened, what worked, and what could have been made better. Understanding also how the contract then follows the years of the concession. So it's a constant dialogue with investors that are here. And this dialogue, for an example, now in coronavirus situation, helped us bring rapid solutions for rebalancing the contracts and making sure services could be provided, and we didn't have problems with those investors, even in difficult situations such as the airport. So all our airport concessionaires had rebalancing of their contracts, so they wouldn't respond for a risk that is not theirs. And this is very important also in the structuring of projects in Brazil. We designed the risks, the matrix of risks in each contract very carefully to make sure that investors don't have to answer for things that they don't administrate. So if you have a health crisis or if you have any issue that your insurance won't be sufficient to cover, then you can count on the contract to have rebalances and not to lose money here in Brazil. Besides that, we are working on demand risks in different projects. So for highways, for example, we need to bring more investors to Brazil in this sector since the portfolio is so huge and we don't have as many players as in airports, for example. So we've been developing new regulations inside the contracts so that we can mitigate the demand risk, so that we can mitigate FX risk. That's something new as well for investors that have their loans in another currency. For highways, we have developed a new solution so that part of the payments that would go to the government go to a different account, like an escrow account, so that we can mitigate FX risks. Legal certainty of the contracts, that's something very important. Brazil respects contracts, and that is something that investors need to know when they come to Brazil. And I would end saying about how ESG our portfolio is, because this is something also that has been attracting very important players from abroad and huge players. So when we talk about the sanitation portfolio, that's the top ESG project you can have, because of course you have great impact on the environment when you're not polluting anymore, but also great social impact on the lives of people and children. So our energy generation projects are very green. Even our railroad projects are considered green. And we had the French group that won the airports of the North last week that said that one reason why he invested so highly, let's say, in Brazil, is that he considers he can make green airports in the Amazon. So we have a very important portfolio of ESG projects.
Well, thank you very much, Marta.
And Carolina, if I may add to Marta's, just looking at BNDES experience in the last, let's say, 6 months or so. Last year, we had an auction in sanitation Alagoas, which was won by Brookfield, the Canadian. Then we had at the end of the year, SEB, Companhia Energética de Brasília, which was took by Neoenergia, which is a Brazilian-Spanish, let's say, partnership. Then a few weeks ago, we had a Companhia Energética do Rio Grande do Sul, which was owned by Equatorial. And Marta said, at the end of this month in April, we have SEDAI, which is 40 billion projects if you put investments plus outorga, plus the auction fee, right? So when you look at this sample and you look at the size of amounts invested, and for example, last week, the Infra Week, where we had also 40 billion of total mobilized assets. When you look at the scale and you look at the outcome of these auctions, the message is clear. If you have good projects, if they are well modeled in sectors with a proper regulation, there will be demand. There is demand. Our main bottleneck today, and again, sorry for being repetitive on this, is to have a good pipeline with quality, well prepared. And that's why I do think that's a great opportunity for law firms, for environmental experts, for engineers, for financial modeling. We have to increase and to grow the decentralized project preparation in Brazil in all layers. Again, environmental, contracts, engineering, financial, investors. And this is an industry that for many years it was not promoted by our public policy. And let's see what happened in Brazil since 2016. It's important that you all have in mind the relevance and how big is the conceptual shift we're seeing in the infra market in Brazil since 5 years ago. And that's why I do think that's it's a long-term curve. For 15 years, our infra market was basically on government subsidies. If you were not able to get BNDES huge subsidies, you are likely out of the market. And when you have such a big subsidy, you don't care about the projects. You care about dealing with the government in order to get the economic transfer you need to close your equation. So project preparations, risk taking, good quality, competition was a second variable. Most important is how to deal and how to use the development bank as an economic transfer in order to take this value for your group. With such a big reverse, with such a big philosophical position, having the economic viable projects well prepared brings a huge market to Brazil. And again, having this long-term view is important because we're all, of course, in crisis here. It's still a delicate moment. But if you look in the long curve, what's been happening for 5 years and what we see going forward is a completely change in the landscape of infra market, from equity investors, financial investors, operators, advisors, and that's a big market elsewhere where you see globally. And Brazil has the potential to fill, to occupy with place to deserve there. And we are moving towards this.
Nice.
Excellent, Montezano. This is really precious information because it shows a big change in the BNDES's role in the past years and in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a question to Montezano. Following the social medias of the bank, I could observe that the BNDES now is sponsoring or better, is structuring sustainable projects. And moving a step back, as Marta mentioned, I kindly ask you to talk a little about these new projects involving ESG policies, concessions of forests. How is the BNDES position for those projects?
Sure. As I mentioned before, we put in place this investment bank for the government, the project factors, what we call. A few months ago, we saw the need of splitting this department. So we have now what we call the traditional project modeling, ports, toll roads, sanitation, the big financial investments. And now we have a second department for modeling as well, which we call the social environmental projects. For example, creches, kindergartens, prisons, hospitals, parks, forests, all these social and environmental projects that they by itself, they are not so relevant when you see an individual investments on a financial perspective, but they have the potential to completely change the landscape of those industry in Brazil. Let's take, for example, the parks, as Martha also mentioned before. We have in our portfolio today 36 parks that we are going to concession to the market. Foz do Iguaçu, Jalapão, Ibitipoca, and we have 30 others across Brazil. When you look at those investments, financial, they are tiny, 5 million, 10 million, 2 million reais. But when you look at the potential of how they can change the ecotourism in Brazil, how they can change the cities, the countryside cities in Brazil, and make the territory development there, it's a landmark change in the sector in Brazil. And you also help to preserve the parks as well. And our goal there is to focus on the impact those projects they have in the society, not only on the financial side, but look at the bank perspective. We are grabbing technology. We're bringing technology inside BNDES, where all the social and environmental modeling, they will be applied on the infrastructure modeling as well. And there is no separation anymore about non-ESG products or ESG products. Either you have a proper ESG model project or you don't have a project. So having the technology, having the knowledge within the bank in order to play both within the ESG framework is critical, both for BNDES and for Brazil. And just reinforce it, I do think that on the environmental side, we're example to be followed elsewhere globally. We are looking at a lot of news in the media about complaining about Brazil, etc. But looking at the very high level perspective and what does really happen here, we are a powerhouse in the agri side, and we have all the tools and all the features to be a powerhouse on the green finance side as well. It's a technology running. It's something new globally. The market, the society is still learning how to play that. But Brazil, having the natural capital we have, mainly the Amazon, having the financial market we have, very creative and very innovative, having the rule of law, which works for an emerging market, a country that knows to deal with technology. When you look at all these features we have all the qualities in order to lead the green finance technology globally. But of course, it's a run. We need to rush, but with society, as a society and collectively, we have all the conditions to be leading this agenda globally, not only Latin America.
Great. Carolina, do you have any questions to Marta or Gustavo?
Sorry.
We're in the mute.
No, I think we can go to
the Q&A.
Yes, to the Q&A, to some questions from the audience. I have selected one that to both Gustavo and Marta. Marta Carreiras Salabi is asking, how is the pandemic impacting on the timeline for completion for these projects?
So can I can start?
Begin? Sure, Marta, please.
I can start. So we had different impacts. First, impact in terms of how we could visit the projects and bring the consultants to the different parts of the country where we are structuring projects. Or we had some issues with transportation. Some enterprises weren't allowing people to move around Brazil. So of course that had some impacts and delayed a few projects. But that means 1 month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months delay in projects, but not more than that. And we know that infrastructure usually means more than 1 year of structuring of projects. So some projects we wanted to have auctioned in 2020. Now we have them in our 2021 portfolio. One important thing we had to do is to understand how the crisis was impacting demand and each sector that we were structuring. So we realized very fast that for the ports, for example, it didn't seem to have a great impact. On the contrary, since we are having a very important production of grains in Brazil and we're exporting so much. We had growth in our ports, so we didn't need to come back to the feasibility numbers when we were talking about port projects. On the other hand, of course, the airports were very affected. So we needed to understand, basically in the first years of the project, how we needed to diminish some of the demand forecast and consequently some of the investments that needed to be done. But when we look at the long term, it didn't affect so much the project. It's more on rebalancing the obligations in the first years of the contracts than the long term. And then we had, one thing is that we had to work with our dogs at home, so I'm sorry for that. Sometimes we have some noise. Also for telecom, for example, it's a different sector when we talk about telecom, because we had an increase in demand because suddenly everybody was in their houses using their computers, using their phones, but people weren't paying for the services because so many people lost their jobs and had some difficulties with the payment. So some sectors, even though the demand was growing, government need to come and help with some solutions because of the situation of the users that were having some trouble paying for the services. So the whole federal government had to analyze packs of alternatives and solutions considering the sectors. So we had many standstills. Montezano will probably talk about that, of financing of projects in the long term because of the crisis. Some taxes that were due from different sectors to the government were postponed on time. We had packages of help, assistance to the population and to the users of some services. So all that had to be analyzed considering the sector. It took a lot of work to keep on following with the projects. But since the beginning, we knew that bringing private investments to infrastructure in Brazil was even more important with the crisis, because that will help a lot to recover economic growth in the future. So all our ministers and the president were strongly recommending that we moved forward with the projects and the auctions to attract the investments and help generating jobs and help surpassing this crisis.
Thank you, Marta. Montezano, we have another question from anonymous attendee. She's asking if you can comment on the historic foreign investor concerns on effects given the nature of the long-term investments in projects of infrastructures, concessions, and PPP. I'm sorry.
Yeah, naturally, when you look at the volatility of BRL, that's a reality. We live a sanitary crisis, right? Brazil is going under a big leverage on the fiscal balance, and not only here in Latin America, but looking at emerging markets globally, we're going to you tend. I'm not sure that will happen, but it tends to be a more volatile environment in the emerging markets currency, right? And looking backwards, this is a risk that foreign investors playing on the infra market in Brazil should be hedging or measuring. And looking forward, the good news to say on that is that BRL is now at 5.7, so the valuation was relevant in Brazil. And as I always say, if you're here to invest for 30 years, 25, 40 years, the best hedge you should try to use is leveraging your projects in BRL based. So your USD exposure will be very, very diminished, right? And then you'll be here for 34 years, where this volatility, the short-term volatility of the currency is diminished, right? But this is something that is there, of course, trying to hedge exposure, trying to leverage in BRL long term. It's some tools that we have, but you cannot deny that it doesn't exist. That's some of the risks that the investor should be willing to play. And again, if you're here to stay for 20, 30, 35 years, it won't make a lot of difference. If you're here to play a cyclical curve of 5 to 7 years, and then you get out, yes, it may be an issue on the exit moment.
I jump in
Great.
here just a second because I used to work at this. Thank you. Just to compliment what Gustavo said, depends on what country you're talking about. So I worked in Canada for 5 years, and the Canadian, I used to call it the Canadian peso, but the Canadian dollar is it's a great hedge against the Brazilian real because of mining, et cetera. So the clients that we had there, which are long-term pension funds, just stayed unhedged because whatever happened to dollar real, sort of the same thing happened to dollar CAD, and you came out even. So they always say, what's your best case, base case, and worst case scenario? And they come out exactly the same. So that was sort of interesting. In the US, you have two choices, right? You can use the local swap market, and certainly only recently have you had a pretty good maturity on those, or the NDF, but at the NDF, there's an offshore premium that you pay. So as Gustavo said, if you're going to stay long term, it's really better really just to not hedge at all, because in the end, the real exchange rate is what's important, and in the end, you come out even on that. Thank you.
Thank you,
I couldn't
John.
resist.
Yeah, thank you. Carol, can you have a next question to them from the Q&A?
One file.
Yeah, we're
Sorry.
almost reaching the final of our panel. I think that we can have one more question and this answer, and then finalize. So the last
Yes.
one.
The last one is if Gustavo Montezano can add some questions on some comments, sorry, on the status of the Eletrobras privatization.
Sure. We are in the process. We're in the process of modeling the deal, just in accordance with the PND, Programa Nacional de Desestatização. Eletrobras was included in the PND barely 1 month ago. Marta, please correct if I miss it. And we do work in a scenario where we bring this asset to the market either in the end of this year, in the beginning of 2022. But again, that's a route that depends on the legislative side, because you need a bill, a new bill for selling the asset. We need a TCU in all the control bodies in Brazil. You need the structuring of what BNDES is running at this moment. You need the market timing, because we should see how markets we should see how market will be behaving at the moment we bring that to the market. But as I said before, the experience we had so far is that if you bring proper deals with good modeling, proper structuring, there will be demand. And that's why we're still very, very optimistic about this opportunity, that because we are going to create a global player in the electricity sector in Brazil. It's a global level asset that will be created once you privatize Eletrobras. Still a long path ahead, many things to be overcome, but we are confident that we are in the right track. And my client Marty is here, so I couldn't say anything different that we're speaking on a day by day.
That's perfect, President Montezano. I would add only that most part of privatizations in Brazil don't need the approval of National Congress, because we had in the past, in the 90s in Brazil, a law that was approved allowing the federal government to move on with privatizations, considering some steps. And this is what Montezano said: we have to do the analysis studies, we have to have the okay of our audit court, the TCU, and public hearings. There are many steps that have to be followed from federal government. But some enterprises, we need to have the okay from National Congress with some guidelines from National Congress as well. So this is the case of Eletrobras. We already have a provisional measure in Congress, and we expect it to be voted until mid-June, I guess. And with this agreement will follow with the analysis to publish the documents until December. That's for Eletrobras. And important to highlight as well, we have a very important bill in Congress for privatization of the National Post. That's also a challenging project since the enterprise is huge in Brazil. We have more than 95,000 people working for the National Post in Brazil in more than 5,000 cities. So it's something different for us to structure. We have been studying best practices all over the world, the countries that went through privatizations of their national services, to try to learn with best practices, but it is a different country with different laws and constitutions, so we have to adapt all those studies to our reality. So we're moving forward with the studies. Today in Brazil, we had a decree that allowed us, a decree from the president that allowed us to continue with the second step of the studies for the National Post, and together with the National Congress that is discussing the guidelines for this project.
Wow, nice. I'd like to thank you, Marta, Montezano. I don't know if John have any comments to add here. I know that your agenda is full, and many thanks to both of you to accept our invite to participate in this panel here in the Brazilian American Chambers of Commerce. It's an honor for us to be here sharing this panel with both of you. John.
Thank you very much, Rafael. Thank you, Martha, Carolina, and Gustavo, also for a really excellent discussion, really excellent. I'd like to also thank you all for joining. I'd like to thank DLA Piper and Campos Melo Advogados once again for their sponsorship. Our next event will take place on Friday, the 16th of April at 10 a.m. when we will have a discussion on Brazilian foreign policy with Ambassadors Nestor Forster and Maria Nazaret Farani Azevedo. Again, we thank you for coming, especially to our members. For those who are not members, please watch the brief video that follows. And we